When I was at university, I had an experimental band, which was quite early in those days. I mean, and we sort of banged around on different things which you could bang around with, and played instruments in a funny way, and so I suppose that gave me an interest in it. I don't think we actually did any recording. I think tape recorders were very expensive in those days. And then I became an exploration geologist. And then when I got married, that was incompatible. You know, my last job was going to be in the Falkland Islands dependencies. That's in Antarctica, and that's not good if you're going to have babies. And so I don't know. Then I suddenly thought that it was a very good time. There were lots and lots of ex-army shops in central London, ex-army and RAF naval shops, with a huge amount of junky gear which could make sounds and could be filters and oscillators and analyzers and things. It was terrific. I'd always wanted to have sequencers rather than cutting up tape. And then David Cockerell had made me quite a lot of voltage controlled devices. And then one day he said, it's no use, you've just got to have a computer to control all these. And then it was obvious computer could give out lots of signals and sequence. I could say, all right, first of all this voltage, then that voltage, and gradually that expanded into having a whole studio which was controlled by the computer. He was sort of a miraculous engineer. I was pretty good at thinking things up, impossible things up. This is what I'd like. And David never blinked an eye about the possibility of making it. He would make whatever was thrown at him. And he had a marvellous career after EMS too. He went to IACAM in France and worked for Akai and all sorts of very good things. But without him, EMS wouldn't have started at all. It just couldn't. It required something of his inspiration and incredible sort of cleverness at design and plugging your way into it was perfect. Yeah, the best electronic music engineer that's ever been. Tristram Carey was our third partner, and he was very involved in the design of the first VCS3 wooden box. And yeah, he was, as far as EMS is concerned, he was right in at the beginning of EMS. But that wasn't the beginning of my studio. He was well known as electronic music film producer and serious composer. And so he came to visit me. And then at some point I thought it would be a good idea to form a company, EMS. And so that's when I asked David and Tristram to be partners in it. And he'd become a friend by then, but at the beginning he wasn't involved at all. And then he gave it up because he didn't like the involvement in the end either. He was a serious composer. He had his own setup in Norfolk. My setup was only I could use it. In fact, last week there was a meeting in London, the Computer Arts Society, which had a meeting to discuss a meeting which I had with the Arts Council and the Gulbenkian Foundation in 1971, where all the sort of musicians and people in experimental music all came together, and I'd offered to give my studio, providing there could be a national studio. And Gulbenkian, who had lots of money, were interested. And so the Arts Council was there, and everybody was there and said, this is brilliant, all right, we've got all this equipment, and it's a good basis. Now we just want a foundation to house it, to finance it. And then the Arts Council got up and said, electronic music is completely useless. The Arts Council is not going to have anything to do with it, nor any government body. It's a DAO. It's got nobody's interested, and it's got no artistic value whatsoever, and that was the end of it. So after that, instead of wanting to have a national studio, I decided to continue myself and sort of making instruments to sell in order to finance the studio. So that was the way of funding it. The first was a VCS3, and then that was followed by a keyboard, a DK, I can't remember what it was called, DK2 in the end. So it must have been a DK1. And then there was Synthi A, and then a keyboard attachment to the KS sequencer. So the digital sequencing came a bit later, and then there was a whole plethora of instruments, pitch to voltage converters, guitar instruments, random number generators, and then finally a huge Synthi 100. And then after that actually there was a computer-controlled Synthi 100, so it was a computer Synthi, and then the vocoder. And the vocoder was in the end incorporated in this gigantic machine, which had a vocoder, computer, and the Synthi 100. That was the biggest thing we made. Once we were delivering one of these in Paris, Robin Wood and I, who we were talking about, and on the way back we were so pleased to have all this cash in our pocket. We went to a cafe, and then after 60 miles or something, we realised I'd left it all behind. We drove back and there was this man in the cafe cutting it out. It was an enormous amount of money. It was like, I don't know, it must have been £8,000 in cash, which now is a gigantic amount. That was a good one. Then our American agent who was selling them took it up and tried to make us a public company in America, and that was the downfall. It got too big, we borrowed too much money from a bank. There was a crash in America and the bank wanted back all the money we'd borrowed, and that was the end. We just couldn't cope. Whereas when it was a smallish British company selling to schools and that here, it was brilliant. I mean, it worked fine, and it didn't matter if there weren't any sales 1 month or something. It was fine. It was on. But once it got to this big thing in America, and in those days it was, people were talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds, so we'd borrow £100,000, and we had $200,000 dug check from a bank in America, and it turned out to be a fraud. And the bank had accepted it here. But when you talk about £100,000 now, it mightn't be all that much in terms of a house. But then, we're talking now, it's £1 million, £1.5 million. It's a lot of money. And so we got too big for our boots, really. And that was it. And it also, I wasn't interested in the business. I hated it. I wanted to just get on with music. And so that was, that's why it folded. Well, the National Theatre took it on, and then they put it in the basement, and it got flooded, because they didn't do anything with it. They just got, last time I saw it was covered with exercise bikes and things like that, all piled on top of computers. And then they sold off a few of the tape recorders, the Ampexes and things like that. The company then was bought by somebody, Williams, and then Robin Wood bought it from him, and all the bits then ended up with Robin Wood, which is great. Well, I suppose I had this very big gap of sort of like 35 years until 2010, it might be, to about 4 or 5 years ago, when I got commissioned to write a piece of music. So up to then I hadn't done any electronic music at all. I had a computer, but I didn't do any music. And I had to really start composing. And so in the last 4 years now I've got lots of commissions and done quite a lot of music. In fact, I'm doing it all the time. And it fits very well. It's just so much nicer having what have I got in this machine? 20 or 30 terabytes of storage. And my first computer was 4K. So, and the first hard drive was 32K. So sometimes at night when I can't sleep, I try and divide 4,000 into 32 terabytes. And it's many, many millions.